high as the women's national football team reaches a milestone with its first win in a regional championship. We begin with this. The health department reports more than 14,000 new COVID-19 cases. That is from July 11 to 17. This means there was an average of nearly 2,100 fresh cases a day. The number is also 44% higher than the previous week. Of the new cases, 35 are in critical condition. Overall, nearly 600 critical infections are admitted in hospitals. 481 out of the 2,630 ICU beds are occupied, while over 5,100 out of 21,800 non-ICU beds are utilized. With infections again on the rise, President Marcos says he will launch a massive COVID-19 booster shot campaign. No details yet on when the rollout will happen, but the president says this is in preparation for in-person classes and the easing of safety protocols. He also attributed his recovery from COVID-19 to his booster vaccination. Here's the president in his own words.
Ito nga ang pangalawang COVID ko na. Pero ang tingin ko, kung hindi dahil sa vaccine at booster shot, ay siguradong mas malubha ang naging tama ko at ang aking pakiramdam. Kung magiging matagumpay ang kampanyang ito, tuloy na yan. Hindi naman talaga kailangan isabatas pa ito dahil malaya pa rin tayong mamili para sa ating sariling kalusugan. Pero habang tumatagal, ay mas lumilinaw ang sinasabi ng siyensya. Ang mga datos at ang mga pag-aaral na ang pagbabakuna ay malaki ang naitutulong para sa ating kaligtasan mula sa COVID-19.
As of this time, here's what we know so far. The president is meeting with health officer in charge, Maria Rosario Vergere, on the COVID-19 alert status for the rest of the month and other pandemic response measures. Now, while the government prepares for the opening of the new school year and the return of in-person classes later on, a teachers group calls on Congress to prioritize bills raising the budget for education and teachers' pay. ACT Philippines held a protest action in front of the Batasang Pambansa in Quezon City earlier today. The group says the low salary of teachers is no longer enough for their families' needs, considering the prices of basic goods and services are still rising. Aside from salary upgrades, the group also wants the urgent doubling of school maintenance and operating budgets, saying this will help them prepare for a safe school reopening. Congress is set to open on Monday, July 25th, the same day President Marcos delivers his first State of the Nation address. House Majority Leader Martin Romualdez says one of their priority bills will be the national budget. Romualdez says they will pass it within the third or last quarter of the year so the president can sign it into law before the year ends. Economic managers earlier said they will submit to Congress the proposed 5.23 trillion peso 2023 budget on August 22nd.
First of all, usually it's the budget, no? And then there's some follow-ons on what we have already passed in the House, but not in the Senate in the previous 18th Congress. So a number of those have already been refiled. But yes, the President has already mentioned it, in various fora. And so we will not limit it to 5, but we will limit to that. We will delimit it and rather focus on that whole basket of legislation. But they're already been filed. I think we've made it clear as to what we will take up, and we are confident that we will do this within the first regular session. We will pass all these measures within the first regular session.
Romualdez, who is a first cousin to Mr. Marcos, is poised to be the next House Speaker. When asked about the composition of Congress, he says no hindrances are expected, adding that he is looking forward to a, quote, very smooth functioning Congress, both in the Senate and the House of Representatives, unquote. Romualdez also had this to say about the next majority leader.
We'll let you know next week. So, we'll try to get those who are willing to make the sacrifice of hard work and getting a consensus to help us in these measures. We're in consultation with the House leadership. We'll go back to our time-honored traditions of having the respective parties properly represented. We will go by also, for the most part, seniority, merit, experience, and of course, the initiative to make the sacrifice of the hard work needed for each of the committees.
It is all systems go for President Marcos's first sauna next week. House Secretary General Mark Leandro Mendoza says over 1,300 people are expected to attend the sauna on Monday, July 25th at the Batasan. Invited guests include former presidents, vice presidents, and speakers, the diplomatic corps, and justices. Mendoza adds health protocols are also in place.
I-require natin na lahat ng papasok ng plenary hall must present a negative RT-PCR test within 48 hours. May negative RT-PCR tayo, not unless na magdagdag ng additional safety nets ang Malacanang. Lahat na require kami magdagdagan pa. Yung antigen, depende pa kung magbibigay sila ng order na bukod po dun sa RT-PCR requirement, kung magdadagdag pa tayo ng antigen testing natin.
Well, as we said earlier, the opening of the 19th Congress happens on Monday. We'll bring you live pictures beginning at 9:30 in the morning that capture special coverage of the president's first sauna beginning at 2 p.m. only here on CNN Philippines. Straight ahead on Newsnight, motorists set to get some relief with fuel companies slashing prices beginning tomorrow, while transport regulators vow to fast-track delayed payments for drivers of the EDSA bus carousel. And how does the Marcos administration plan to respond to the International Criminal Court's probe into the Duterte government's drug war? You're watching CNN Philippines.
Sila ang nagtatanong.
We're strong and enduring.
Simula pa lang ito.
Because you have complied with all the requirements of the law.
Time we will launch.
To join me in sending them out.
Diyos, ito mismo ang diwa.
Bilib ako sa MX3 dahil ito ay napatunayang may alpha
This is Newsnight on CNN Philippines. Fuel companies set to cut pump prices tomorrow. Fuel companies will reduce gasoline prices by 5 pesos per liter and diesel by 2 pesos per liter. Expect cheaper kerosene prices as well, with a rollback of 70 centavos per liter. Now, this marks the third fuel price cut in weeks. Transport regulators vow to fast-track payments for the EDSA bus carousel program as drivers complain about delays. The LTFRB and Transport Secretary Jaime Bautista met with groups operating the EDSA bus carousel today. The LTFRB plans to update payments by the end of this month. The agency says delays began during the 6th week of the program, which was launched late March. The LTFRB says it has partially paid up to the 10th week. Drivers are hoping to get their wages soon, as some of them are already facing mounting debts because of the delays. Paige Javier filed this story.
Some drivers and conductors on board the Libreng Sakay program have no choice but to wait for their salaries. They have nothing against the service contracting program of the government, but they are crying foul over the delay in payments. Some of those we spoke to have yet to receive their wages.
Dili po kasi may 1.5 months pa kaming hindi nababayaran na sahod. Yung last po namin, May pa yun.
Delay po kami ngayon ng kasi June 4 pa lang po yung naging huling sahod po namin.
The government has allotted 7 billion pesos for the program. Under this, drivers and operators receive a one-time payout and weekly salary depending on the distance. They want to know what's keeping them from getting their pay.
Pagka nagtanong po kami, sabi naman na pagka nagtanong ko sa LTFRB, sabi bayad na raw, ganyan. Kaya po napakahirap din ma'am.
Yung sabi naman po, delay daw yung bayad ng gobyerno sa operator.
Buklod ng manggagawa sa ES Transport President Joji Visconde says the Labor Department called for a dialogue on the matter. They earlier claimed the unpaid dues and incentives in 2021 reached 20 million pesos. But he says there is still no resolution on their case. Drivers hope they receive their salaries on time after serving the public, especially commuters.
Sana pantay-pantay, mapapaganda yung mga commuter natin dahil nakakaminos sila sa gastusin. Sana ganun din sa mga empleyado kasi pare-parehas naman pong may pamilya.
Paige Javier, CNN Philippines.
Apart from the late payments, the LTFRB and DOTR discussed the maximum deployment of units during rush hour. Instead of the current 200, operators want to increase the number of units to more than half to serve more passengers. In other news, the International Criminal Court is giving the Philippines until September 8 to comment on the reopening of the investigation into the Duterte administration's bloody war on drugs. Chrissy Di Matulak tells us how the government plans to respond.
The government is looking at ways to respond to the invitation of the International Criminal Court for it to comment on the resumption of the past administration's drug war probe. In a message to the media, Solicitor General Menardo Guevara says his office is considering a number of options, such as challenging the jurisdiction of the ICC. The OSG is also considering if it will leave its communication lines open with the International Court. Guevara says consultations will be conducted with the Foreign Affairs Department, Justice Department, international law experts, and the Office of the President. In the meantime, Senator Bato de la Rosa says the country has a working and functioning justice system. The lawmaker was formerly the lead in the drug war as National Police Chief. Aside from former President Rodrigo Duterte, De La Rosa is also being investigated for alleged crimes against humanity. According to the National Union of People's Lawyers, the government's compliance to ICC's request under the term of President Bongbong Marcos can assure justice to the victims.
If there is really going to be any unity, then it should be unity on the basis of respect for human rights and the rule of law and the recognition of international mechanisms as a legitimate forum for accountability. No?
The investigation on the drug war was suspended in November 2021 after the Philippines requested to defer the probe. In 2019, the Philippines pulled out of the ICC, claiming that the Rome Statute, the treaty which established the ICC, was not ratified. However, human rights lawyer Chrissy Conti says the court still has jurisdiction over the investigation.
The Supreme Court said that we still have residual obligations with regard to ICC proceedings. In the Rome Statute, in its rules, when we signed it, we committed ourselves to continue to cooperate once a case or once a situation has become under the purview of the OTP, of the Office of the Prosecutor.
According to the Office of the Solicitor General, President Bongbong Marcos has yet to discuss the ICC investigation. Chrissy Di Matulak, CNN Philippines.
Government data counts 7,000 deaths in the drug war, but local and international human rights groups estimate the numbers are between 12 to 30,000. Senator De La Rosa also says he will not cooperate with the ICC should it resume its investigation into the drug war. He maintains it is an insult to the country's justice system. Senator Robin Padilla echoes the sentiment, saying the probe sets a precedent for foreign interference.
Hindi nila alam kung ano nangyayari dito sa atin eh. Hindi nila alam kung anong problema natin dito. Bakit sila magkikialam? Di ba? Oo. Harap ako, magpatry ako before a Filipino court, not a foreign court.
Sayang ang sinakripisyo ng mga bayani natin kung maghahari-harian dito, foreigner, di ba? Siguro, pwedeng ICC, payagan natin sila, observer.
Senator Nancy Binay, however, urges the government to submit to the legal process in the, quote, interest of transparency, while Senator Coco Pimentel calls on the ICC to make a final decision on what it wants to do regarding the probe so that the government can respond accordingly. Switching gears, National Security Advisor Clarita Carlos has yet to decide whether to change policies in the West Philippine Sea or retain those of the Duterte administration. Carlos met with Coast Guard officials at their headquarters in Manila today to discuss border security in the West Philippine Sea, the Philippine Rise, as well as in Mindanao. Here's what she and the PCG have to say about the direction of the National Task Force for the West Philippine Sea under the new administration.
We're going to have another meeting next week, so we're just really trying to figure out who is going to do what and so on. So let me understand it first before I make any comment. I'm sorry.
Inalam din namin kung anong mga protocols at saka mga policies ang mga mababago doon sa mga dating mga pina-follow natin.
Carlos was at the Coast Guard headquarters as part of her visits to agency members of the National Security Council. The Foreign Affairs Department raises the alert level to 2 in Sri Lanka, which is battling a political and economic crisis. This means there will be no new deployment of workers to the South Asian country, and only those with live contracts are allowed to return. Overseas Workers Welfare Administration Chief Hans Kakdak says the government is now preparing a repatriation flight for Filipino nationals there.
May kailangan sa tulong sa transport, we can come in to help, but also yung pagbalik ng mga repatriates ng OFWs, we can provide livelihood assistance as well as school assistance for OFW, for children of active OWA members, food, water, vitamins, hygiene necessities. We can provide this. We can arrange this and request yung mga those identified by the DFA on the ground to distribute.
There are around 700 Filipinos in Sri Lanka. In China, thousands of tourists are trapped in a resort town as authorities enforce a snap lockdown because of rising COVID-19 cases. Over 500 infections were reported in Beihai, a known tourist spot in southern China. Visitors identified as contacts will have to stay in the city and undergo quarantine. India marks a milestone in its COVID-19 response. Despite surging infections, vaccination numbers hit 2 billion over the weekend, with boosters underway for adults. India's daily cases rose to over 20,500 on Sunday, the highest since February 20. The United States extends its COVID-19 public health emergency for another 3 months, or until October 13th. It comes as the U.S. reports its highest cases, hospitalizations, and deaths in months. The emergency was first declared in January 2020. Top health officials raised the alarm over the spread of monkeypox, with the COVID-19 infection soaring yet again in the U.S. CNN's Cole Higgins reports the monkeypox outbreak should be taken more seriously.
Monkeypox has been detected throughout most of the U.S. According to the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, there are cases in at least 45 states and jurisdictions. And now the CDC reporting there are at least 1,814 probable or confirmed monkeypox cases across the country, causing some top health officials to warn the window to contain the virus may already be closed.
We made a lot of the same mistakes that we made with COVID with this, having a very narrow case definition, not having enough testing. And while it's not going to explode because it's harder for this virus to spread, it's probably going to be persistent. You'll have this as a sort of a fact of life.
Worldwide, monkeypox cases surpassing 12,000, and officials say the real numbers are likely higher.
You're always probably looking at what might be, we don't know, the tip of the iceberg. So that's the reason why we've got to get the testing out there in a much more vigorous way.
Dr. Fauci says more testing will be done, with 5 commercial testing laboratories coming online. He also expects up to 700,000 vaccines to be distributed to communities by the end of July. Fauci and other top health officials also worrying about the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic in the U.S. Fueled by the Omicron offshoot BA.5, daily COVID-19 case rates are surging again, and hospitalizations and deaths are also up.
We've got to stay on top of this virus. We've got to keep building new generations of vaccines. We've got to make sure we have adequate treatments. We can get through this.
I'm Cole Higgins reporting.
Up next, the Filipinas proved to be the best in Southeast Asia after beating Thailand for the AFF Women's Championship. Plus, Hollywood A-listers Jennifer Lopez and Ben Affleck are now married again. Keep it here on Newsnight.
It can be dangerous out there. Buti na lang there's locally super fruits with 3 kinds of fruits that are super in many ways.
Welcome back. Her story for the Philippine women's football team. The Filipinas exact revenge on regional powerhouse Thailand, winning their first ASEAN Football Federation Women's Championship title. But there's no stopping the new football queens as they look to slay more giants in Asia. A training camp is in the works for the team in late August to September. Head coach Alan Stajic says they plan to set up friendlies with other nations like New Zealand.
We've come a long way, but you know, not for 1 second do we underestimate how tough the challenge is going to be moving forward to rise even higher up the ranks of the world and compete, you know, really for the big prizes in world football. For us to be stronger, we need to identify better players around the world, and we need a better development pathway here in the Philippines as well.
Pauline Versosa takes us back to the moment the Filipinas became the new football queens of Southeast Asia.
For the first time, the Philippine women's football team has emerged on top in Southeast Asia. On Sunday, the Filipinas clinched their first ever crown in any tournament after defeating Thailand 3-0 in a fierce finals showdown in the 2022 AFF Women's Championship. Right from kickoff, the Filipinas came out guns blazing, and as early as the 8th minute, a corner kick by team captain Tanay Anis would find Jessica Cowart to give them a dream start. Anis's ball. The Filipinas continued to crack their opponent's defense as Katrina Gilyu found the back of the net, doubling the team's lead at the 20th. Thailand remained scoreless entering the second half. Still, the Filipinos did not let their defense down, with goalkeeper Olivia McDaniel determined to keep a clean sheet. In the 89th minute, top striker Serena Bolden delivered the dagger with a header from a corner by Sarah Egishvik, sealing their title as the new queens of football in the region.
There's no magic. It's lots of hard work at training and lots of discipline and dedication from everyone. And really, it's a whole team effort. This group is on the up, and we're an evolving and an emerging team. And I think that we've shown that we can definitely be a threat in Southeast Asia. Our job now is to become a powerhouse in Asia as well.
This marks another milestone for the Filipinas after booking a historic ticket to the 2023 FIFA World Cup in January and clinching historic semi-final seats during the AFC Asian Cup and 31st Southeast Asian Games.
I think we're just really starting to believe in ourselves and really trust what we're doing. This is just the start. We're going to keep getting better, and we're going to give everyone a show next year at the World Cup.
Bolden, who emerged as the tournament's top scorer with 8 goals, also gave credit to those who paved the way for the team's success.
When you stick with something and you believe in it, only good can come out of it. Like, we've worked so hard. Girls on the team that have been here before I have even been on the team have worked and dedicated their lives to this, and to finally see it come to fruition is just so beautiful.
The Filipinas' victory was fueled by the electrifying support of over 8,000 fans at the Rizal Memorial Stadium.
I brought my Philippine flag. Playing on home field it's just your hair stands up. You hear them, isa pa, it's a different experience altogether, and I'm just proud of them.
I feel great. Wonderful tournament, wonderful crowd tonight. It was exciting, amazing, glad. We could be here for this.
I'm super proud of you guys. Can't wait to be back on the field with you.
In Philippines.
Second time's the charm for Hollywood stars Jennifer Lopez and Ben Affleck, who have officially tied the knot, sources confirming the couple exchanged vows in an intimate ceremony in Las Vegas in the U.S. state of Nevada on Saturday. The Bennifer love saga is one that took years in the making. The two got engaged in April, over 18 years since they called off their first engagement. Second time to get engaged, first time to be married. And in music, get ready to take a trip down memory lane with your favorite old school songs from the Beatles. Global act Bootleg Beatles is returning to Manila this October. A series of concerts will be held on the dates flashed on your screens in Pasay and in Cebu and Davao City. Tickets go on sale Friday, July 22nd. And that is it for now. Join me again on News.ph at 7 p.m. I'm Pia Ontiveros for Newsnight, where we go above and beyond the headlines.
This program
Dengue is one of the most infectious diseases here in the Philippines, having infected up to 80,000 Filipinos in 2021 alone. Now, as the rainy season begins, the chances of getting infected by dengue increases as well, which is why in today's episode, we'll give you tips to avoid infection and keep yourselves and your loved ones protected. I'm Dr. Freddy Gomez, and welcome to MedTalk Health Talk, only on CNN Philippines. Our guests are here today to give their insights on dengue. With us is Dr. Carl Evan Henson. He is the director of the Hospital Infectious Control and Epidemiology Center at the Medical City. Also with us is Dr. Michael Campued. He is the president of the Philippine Society of Public Health Physicians. In the age of COVID-19, if you go to a hospital and you have a fever, your fever will be treated as COVID-19 unless proven otherwise. But did you know that before COVID-19 was here, any fever that you'd had was considered dengue unless proven otherwise? Now, I'll start the conversation with Dr. Carl. What I just mentioned, Dr. Carl, just shows how prevalent dengue is here in the Philippines. Why is this so? Could you explain to our viewers basically what dengue is and why is it so infectious?
Dengue is an infection caused by the dengue virus, and this virus is carried by mosquitoes. So not all mosquitoes carry dengue. There's a very specific species of mosquitoes. And these mosquitoes actually live in tropical areas. They came from Africa, but they're now very widespread in tropical regions now. So this mosquito also can carry the other infections like Zika, chikungunya, etc. So they can cause a lot of problems. And that's why you see dengue usually in the tropical areas, because that's where the mosquitoes that carry these infections live.
Dr. Carl, you mentioned a good point a while ago that dengue is caused by a vector, a mosquito, which is also the vector for other diseases, which I'm sure our viewers have heard about. So does that mean that if mosquitoes are around, they are not just at risk for contracting dengue, but for chikungunya, for Zika as well?
It all depends on how prevalent the disease is. Among all of those diseases that we mentioned, dengue is the most common. So when you get bitten by the Aedes mosquito, you're more likely to get dengue than, say, Zika or chikungunya. So it's really more predominantly dengue these days.
Now, Dr. Mike, I'll go to you this time and talk about what makes an area endemic for dengue. Because I'm sure maybe our viewers who have had dengue before, they will notice that if they contracted dengue, it's not just them. Probably a neighbor has had dengue as well, or probably a coworker. Kumbaga, hindi siya isolated, marami. What makes an area more prone to being infected or having dengue among several people?
What makes for endemicity is the presence of the cases. No? Pagka tinitingnan na natin yung mga lugar sa atin, no, what we recognize is that urban areas do have dengue cases, and at least we compare it across the Philippines as a tropical areas where Aedes aegypti or Aedes mosquitoes live, essentially would bring in the endemicity of dengue. And as long as there is a continued presence of the virus, then that's what we say na magkakaroon ka ng risk. Now, when we look at it environmentally, so titingnan natin, usually areas where a lot of stagnant water will make for an essential breeding ground as well for the virus.
Dr. Mike, what about malaria? Ang malaria, mosquito din, lamok din ang kanyang carrier. Pero bakit hindi siya ganun ka-common sa like what you said, urbanized areas?
With malaria, there are areas where the virus are actually found. So within the Philippines, it's not actually all over the Philippines. So we still have to establish the presence of the virus among the mosquitoes for us to say that there is the presence of that disease. Dengue was carried furthermore than malaria. Pero ayun, kalungkutang palad, meron pa rin tayong areas where we have malaria.
Now, Dr. Carl, let's talk about the symptoms, the common symptoms that might prompt someone to think that they have dengue.
Dengue fever, so lagnat ang primary symptom niya. No? Almost all patients will present with fever. The other name for dengue is breakbone fever. Ibig sabihin nun, you get this high-grade fever, but also this muscle aches and pains. Parang bone pain yung kind ng pain that they experience. And when you have fever, you get the usual nakasama ng lagnat, a headache, we said muscle aches and pains, no? Some warmth in the eyes. And then some patient will describe this headache that seems to occur behind the eyes, yung retroorbital pain. So those are the most common. Some patients will get a kind of a rash on day 3 or 4 of illness. Pwedeng magkaroon ng non-specific rash that goes away by itself, no?
Now, Dr. Carl, do these symptoms, when they come out, mas delikado ba ang mga symptoms na ito kapag bata ang may dengue or just as equal risk whether it be a child or an adult?
Actually, in children, most likely that children will present with a very mild or even asymptomatic form of dengue. No? They can get bitten and then they won't know it kasi very mild in symptoms. Pero dengue will infect all age groups, and even healthy adults can get the bad symptoms of dengue.
When we return, we'll discuss what you should do if you get infected with dengue, right here on MedTalk Health Talk. I'm Dr. Freddy Gomez, and welcome back to MedTalk Health Talk, where caring is our calling. Taking proper action and subsequent treatment for dengue is necessary as soon as symptoms of dengue begin to appear. So it's very important that you get the correct diagnosis for having dengue. Dr. Mike, how is someone correctly diagnosed to having dengue? Symptoms or kailangan pa ng blood test dito, Doc Mike?
So usually, when a patient presents with fever, that's what we call a suspect case, no? A fever, and then the symptomatologies that were described earlier by Dr. Carl, no? And then we come to a probable conclusion of dengue once we have rapid diagnostic test or any testing, no? Like for example, NS1 antigen test, yung diagnostic test natin, or you can see a manifestation in the blood counts, no? There's a decrease in platelet or the WBC of the patient. But what confirms a diagnosis is essentially the RT-PCR, no? Now have mga more facilities that are capable of doing that. But of course, no, we don't rely on that presence to begin action. Even at the probability or suspicion, begin action as we see a patient.
Yes, Dr. Mike, action is definitely important here. Dr. Carl, nakakamatay ba ang dengue?
In a word, yes. Dengue can lead to severe complications. And if it is not addressed properly and in the correct facility, then patients can die from dengue.
Okay, let's talk about that. Correctly managed. What is the initial move of a doctor in their plan to treat someone who is correctly diagnosed already with dengue?
Okay, so dengue essentially and in most cases is what's called a self-limiting disease. Sabihin nun, kahit wala kang gawin, pwedeng mawala yung symptoms on its own. But in a minority of cases, some patients will have the more severe forms, and this takes the form of what's called plasma leakage. So if that happens, you can get the complications of dengue, like for example, fluid around the lungs, fluid in the belly. Platelets can drop, leading to complications of bleeding. And because this is a virus, there's no one cure. There's no medicine that I can give you that will take away the virus. No? Kailangan the doctors must monitor the vital signs well, give the appropriate volume of fluids, and monitor the response of the patient to those kinds of fluids.
Dr. Carl, that's a good explanation of the management. But I'm sure a lot of our viewers, when they hear dengue, they hear blood
count. Eventually, in about 1 or 2 days, that will go up on its own. So unless there are actual bleeding complications, we almost never give transfusion.
Dr. Mike, for the most part, what we've learned so far, that the majority of cases of dengue is self-limiting. But of course, what sticks to the minds of a lot of viewers are those extreme cases of dengue. How does dengue go to that? How does stories of bleeding and complications from dengue reach that point? Does it have anything to do with certain types of dengue?
There are different vulnerabilities for each patient. And what we do understand in science is that reinfection with dengue is definitely a stage for you to get into the dengue hemorrhagic fever. So that's one thing that we can definitely say, no? If there is history in a patient with previous dengue, we worry about that and we make sure that the patient is actually within a facility that has readiness for hemorrhagic treatment. Pero doon sa mga other things that can actually increase the probability, it ranges. But I support Sir Carl, no? Even me, no? We've been very conservative on how we see dengue, and it's not the first thing that we worry about when we see dengue. What we firstly worry is hydration. But patients that fail to actually hydrate, patients that fail to actually take care of themselves, patients that have pre-existing conditions, like for example, a hemolytic condition, or a patient with an autoimmune disease, or patients that are already suffering some form of dehydration, these are patients that can be pushed. Once at the critical phase of dengue, di natin nalagpasan yon, then that's when we hear na we have to really look out at CBCs as signs in the changes in the blood counts.
When we return, we'll talk about what you can do to prevent dengue infection from spreading. We'll be right back on MedTalk Health Talk. I'm Dr. Freddy Gomez, and this is MedTalk Health Talk, your partner in healthcare. Now, there are plenty of ways to ensure that you and your loved ones are protected from dengue, and this is through proper prevention. Before we go to prevention, Dr. Carl, earlier Dr. Mike mentioned one of the risk factors of dengue progressing is that of a previous infection of dengue. This means someone who has had dengue before would probably have little or barely noticeable symptoms. How is that a risk factor for a succeeding infection of dengue?
The dengue virus has 4, I like to call them flavors, serotypes. Dengue 1, 2, 3, and 4. When you get infected with your first serotype, that's called a primary infection, and you can get a mild disease, etc. So there's parang cross protection but not complete, meaning that when you get infected with one, you get some sort of protection but not complete, and then it wanes over time. So your body, your immune system, develops some antibodies against the first virus, and it sort of partially will protect you against the 2, 3, 4 virus. So when you get infected with virus number 2 or virus number 3, then your immune system has this sort of seeming memory. It mounts an immune response, but the protection is not complete. That leads to more serious symptoms, because your body, your immune system is trying to fight off, but it's not successful at completely eradicating the virus. That leads to the more complications of dengue.
So just a reminder to our viewers, those who have had previous dengue infections, you must be extra careful with subsequent infections with dengue. With that in mind, let's talk about prevention. Dr. Mike, what are the best ways, the most practical ways, the easiest, most simplest ways Filipinos can do to prevent themselves from being infected with dengue?
That's very nice to actually hear, kasi that's what we really want patients to do. There are a range of actions as a society that we can do, but individually self-protection is very important. So the things that you can do is to make sure that you don't go out at the times when there are a lot of mosquitoes. Right now, it's quite vague on how we time now that the presence of mosquitoes outside, but we will make sure that at the time that we go out, especially if you're within areas where dengue is endemic, you have to wear long sleeves, long pants, or even wear insect repellents. Another thing that we can do is actually looking at breeding grounds of mosquitoes. There's the strategy of DOH, which we call 4S strategy, which primarily points to search and destroy breeding grounds. When we look at areas, we have to remember that any small puddle or amounts of water can actually be breeding ground for mosquitoes.
So the 4S strategy, definitely, Dr. Mike, is something that all Filipinos must be aware of. Going back a little bit, you mentioned that the use of insect repellents, of course, is very practical, very handy, effective as well. But what's important, what can you share with our viewers on what is most effective in actually repelling the mosquitoes?
I haven't really encountered any comparative studies that looks at the effectivity of these. But I do think that, firstly, yung chemicals like the DEET, they already are established repellents, but in moderated amounts. But for those that are more from natural sources, like for example citronella oils, they do offer effectivity as well. So definitely once the kind of like the oils of these oils actually mix into the oils of the body, and the scent that you're exuding is going to be very deterrent for for mosquitoes. But what I think would be best is a combination of all these.
Now, Dr. Carl, going back to dengue per se, there's what is also termed by physicians as the critical phase. This was mentioned a little bit by Dr. Mike in passing a while ago. Please explain to us, Dr. Carl, what is the critical phase? Why is this so important to know?
So there are 3 phases in dengue: the febrile phase, the critical, and the convalescent. Febrile phase, as the term implies, may lagnat. When the fever goes away, so sabi natin kanina, 3 to 7 days of fever. Now, when the fever goes away, that commences the critical phase, where you can get the complications of dengue. You can get a drop in your platelet count, and then there can be more plasma leakage. The patient can get short of breath. The blood pressure can exhibit some changes that are worrisome, what's called the narrow pulse pressure. And then if the patient is managed correctly, given the appropriate number of fluids, etc., then the patient enters the convalescent phase or the recovery phase. The critical phase, which is the 2 days after the fever goes away, that's actually the most important part where monitoring needs to happen.
Yes, that's right. That's why this is the phase where things can take a turn for the worst if not being managed and monitored by medical specialists. Before we go, some important tips for the viewers, especially when it comes to dengue. I'll start first with Dr. Mike.
Tips, definitely what I've mentioned, the 4S strategy, search and destroy, looking at breeding grounds around, and self-protection, seek early consultation, and of course the fogging. But critical as well is for you to actually report yourself if you have dengue. We have to be aware for our neighbors as well, to be aware that there is an increasing case around.
Yes, awareness is definitely important. And Dr. Carl, any advice to the viewers before we go?
Well, at the bottom line, really, the symptoms of dengue are very non-specific. Other diseases can present the same way. Fever, headache, muscle aches and pains, that can be anything. No? It can even be COVID and some of the other viral infections. No? So I think the most important thing, most important message is if you have a fever, you need to consult. There are many ways now. You don't need to go to the emergency room. You can do teleconsultation. You can go to your doctor's clinic, etc. But I think the important thing is for you to consult your doctor.
Yes, consult your doctor. Definitely always a good choice. With that, thank you very much, Dr. Carl Evans Henson and Dr. Michael Campued for being with us today and sharing your tips and expertise about dengue. I'm Dr. Freddy Gomez, and thank you for watching MedTalk Health Talk. We'll see you again.